The Dakota plains screamed under the weight of a winter storm that seemed sent from another world. Snow flew sideways, stinging like glass as Clara Whitmore stumbled through the white chaos. The year was 1882, and she had never known cold like this. Her wool coat was frozen stiff, her boots filled with snow, and her fingers were so numb she could barely feel the satchel she clutched against her chest. Somewhere behind her, the wagon that carried her trunk and teaching supplies was buried in a drift, and the driver who'd promised to guide her to Willow Creek had fled hours ago. The last thing he'd shouted over the wind was that he'd come back with help. Clara knew he wouldn't. Men didn't come back in storms like this. Each breath burned her lungs, each step heavier than the last. The world had turned into a wall of white, where sky and ground were one. She had taught in Philadelphia and dreamed of teaching frontier children about words and numbers and the wonders of the world. But now, she could barely remember why she'd left the safety of her classroom back east. Her father's debts, the whispers, the rejection letters, the chance at a new beginning in Willow Creek. Those had all felt noble reasons 3 days ago. Now they felt like foolishness. She was about to sink to her knees when she saw it. A flicker of gold through the snow, faint and far, but real. A window, a cabin, salvation. Clara forced her frozen legs to move faster, stumbling, crawling when she had to. The light grew brighter, larger. Her heart thudded weakly as she reached a wooden porch, her hand pounding on the door with what little strength she had left. "Please," she gasped, her voice barely a whisper. "Help me, please." The heavy door swung open, and there he stood. He was the largest man Clara had ever seen, broad-shouldered, towering, with dark hair hanging to his collar and eyes the color of winter steel. He filled the doorway like a mountain come to life. For a moment, Clara thought she'd gone mad, that she was staring at a ghost or a myth. Without a word, he reached down and lifted her easily, carrying her into the warmth. The doors slammed shut behind them, cutting off the scream of the wind. Heat hit her face like a slap. She blinked against the orange glow of firelight. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and strong coffee. When he set her on her feet, her legs gave way, and he caught her before she fell. "T.H. Thank you," she stammered, teeth chattering. The man didn't answer. He pulled a chair close to the fireplace and guided her into it, then disappeared into another room. Clara's heart pounded, not just from the cold, but from fear. She was alone, miles from anyone, in a strange man's home. When he returned, he carried blankets and a steaming mug. "Drink," he ordered, his deep voice rough as gravel. She obeyed. The coffee was hot and bitter, with a burn of whiskey that spread warmth through her chest. She could feel her fingers again, painfully at first. The fire roared, throwing shadows across the log walls. The cabin was larger than it looked, clean, orderly, with shelves of books and hand-built furniture. Not what she'd expected from a frontiersman. There were volumes of Shakespeare, Emerson, even poetry. "You're the new schoolteacher," he said finally, sitting across from her. It wasn't a question. "Heard you were coming. Didn't figure you'd be fool enough to travel in weather like this." Clara bristled. "The skies were clear this morning. The storm came suddenly." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Storms always give warning. Folks just don't look close enough to see it." He glanced toward the window. "This one will last 3, maybe 4 days. You'll stay here until it passes." 3 days? Her heart sank. "But I'm expected in Willow Creek. The school board. The school board can wait. Dead teachers aren't much use to children." He stood and began banking the fire. "You'll shelter here. There's nowhere else for 10 miles. Clara's cheeks burned. The idea of staying alone with this stranger was unthinkable. "I couldn't possibly." He turned toward her, arms crossed. His expression softened, almost amused. "You'll warm my bed tonight," he said plainly, "and I'll build you a ranch tomorrow." Quote. The mug nearly slipped from her hands. "I beg your pardon?" A hint of a smile touched his mouth. "Not what you think, schoolteacher. You're half frozen, and there's one bed in this cabin. You sleep in that chair all night, and you'll be dead by morning." We share the bed for warmth, nothing more. Come spring, if you decide this land suits you, I'll build you a proper house. Maybe you'll even stay and teach the valley's children." She stared at him, torn between fear and fascination. His words were outrageous, but his tone held no wickedness. There was a strange honesty in his eyes, loneliness even. "I don't even know your name," she said quietly. "Gideon Cole," he replied. "You can call me Gideon." "Clara Whitmore." He nodded once. "You can change in the next room. There's hot water for washing. My shirt'll do for the night." Clara hesitated, clutching the offered flannel. Why would you offer to build a ranch for a woman you've just met? He turned back to the fire, his shadow stretching long across the floor. "Because I know what it's like to gamble everything on a new life," he said. "And because a man with land like this needs something to build for. Someone, maybe." She didn't know how to answer. The storm outside roared like an ocean, but inside, something else was stirring. Something that frightened and comforted her all at once. As she changed in the small bedroom, her hands still trembling from the cold, Clara realized that this stranger might be the only reason she'd see another sunrise. And maybe, just maybe, her future had begun the moment she'd knocked on his door. When she returned, wrapped in his nightshirt and blankets, Gideon had laid out extra quilts on the bed. He stood beside it, fully dressed, eyes averted. "I'll sleep in the chair," he said. "No," Clara whispered, surprising herself. "You were right. It's about survival. Nothing more." He nodded, and they settled on opposite sides of the bed, careful not to touch. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, warmth spread between them, not just from the fire, but from the quiet understanding that, for now, they needed each other to survive. As Clara drifted towards sleep, she thought of her students waiting in Willow Creek, and of the giant cowboy beside her, whose words had already begun to change the course of her life. The world outside was still a blur of white when Clara woke the next morning. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was, only that she was warm for the first time in days. Then she felt the heavy quilts, smelled the smoke of burning pine, and heard the quiet crackle of the fire. She turned her head. The other side of the bed was empty, but still warm. Gideon Cole was already up. Clara sat slowly, the events of the night returning in pieces. The storm, the cabin, the giant who'd carried her out of the snow and told her she'd warm his bed tonight. It should have been scandalous, but now it only felt like survival. She found her clothes drying near the hearth, warm to the touch. Her satchel sat neatly on the table beside a plate of biscuits and a mug of steaming coffee. "You're awake!" came Gideon's voice from the doorway. He was dusted with snow, a pile of firewood in his arms. His dark hair was damp, his breath fogging the cold air behind him. "Didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't." Clara took the mug in both hands. "You've been outside already." "Had to clear the drift from the door," he said, setting the wood by the fireplace. "And split enough for the day. Storm's still thick. Won't be traveling anywhere soon." Clara nodded, glancing toward the window. The world beyond the frosted glass looked unreal. Just wind and snow and blinding light. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." He shrugged, pulling off his gloves. Didn't do anything special, just opened a door. But he had done more than that, and they both knew it. Clara studied him as he moved about the cabin. He was enormous, broad across the shoulders, every motion calm and deliberate. Yet there was gentleness in the way he handled everything, the way he set down his axe, the care he took to refill the kettle, the patience in his silence. When he noticed her watching, he offered a half smile. "I reckon you're wondering what kind of man lives alone out here." "I admit I am," she said, meeting his eyes. "You don't strike me as a hermit." He chuckled. "Maybe not by choice." He took the chair across from her, pouring himself coffee. "I came west after the war. Thought I'd find peace, maybe purpose. Ended up finding land instead. Never figured I'd stay this long." "You built all this yourself?" He nodded. "Cut every log, hauled every stone. Took 5 years." Clara looked around the room with new eyes. The craftsmanship was careful, strong, just like the man. "And in all that time," she asked quietly, "you never thought of bringing someone here?" His eyes held hers for a moment before he looked away. "Thought about it, but not many women come this far, And the ones who do usually don't want a man like me." Clara frowned. "And what kind of man is that?" Quote, "The kind who's learned to live with ghosts." The room fell silent except for the hiss of the fire. Clara reached for her satchel, more for something to do than any purpose. Her fingers brushed the photograph inside, a picture of her old class in Philadelphia, 20 bright young girls who'd waved her off with tears and laughter. Gideon noticed. "Those your students?" She nodded. "They gave me this before I left. Said I was brave to go teach in the territories." "Brave," he echoed. "Maybe. Foolish, too, traveling alone in winter." She smiled faintly. "Both, perhaps. But I wanted a new start. Back east, everything was heavy. My father's death, the whispers. People forget that women can't just outlive their past in a city. Out here, I thought I could." "You can," he said simply. Something in his tone made her believe it. The rest of the morning passed quietly. Clara mended a tear in her glove while Gideon worked by the window, repairing a broken harness strap. It was the kind of silence that felt full rather than empty. At noon, he made stew from dried meat and root vegetables. When they sat to eat, Clara caught him watching her hands, the small movements as she buttered her bread. It wasn't hunger she saw in his eyes. It was something deeper, something she didn't dare name. After the meal, Gideon reached for a worn violin case resting on the mantel. Clara blinked in surprise. "You play?" "Used to," he said, almost shyly. "My mother taught me before she passed. Haven't touched it in years." He tuned it slowly, then began to play. The sound filled the cabin, soft at first, then strong, clear, and full of something aching and beautiful. Clara sat perfectly still, afraid that even a breath might break the spell. When he finished, she realized tears had filled her eyes. That was incredible. He smiled faintly. "My mother used to say music was proof God hadn't given up on us yet." "She was a wise woman," Clara said. He nodded. "She was also the one who taught me to read, made me memorize Shakespeare before I could hold a rifle." That explained the books, she thought. And the way he spoke, with a quiet thoughtfulness that didn't fit the rough life of a frontiersman. As evening fell, they prepared the bed again without speaking of it. But the air felt different, less tense, more comfortable. When Clara lay down beside him, careful to keep to her side, she found herself whispering into the dark. "Gideon? Why did you say you'd build me a ranch?" For a long time he didn't answer. Then, quietly, "Because I've built everything else with my hands, but nothing with my heart. Maybe it's time I start." The words sank deep into her. She didn't reply, but her fingers tightened on the edge of the blanket. Outside, the storm was weakening. Inside, the fire burned low, and the distance between them felt smaller than ever. Clara closed her eyes and listened to the rhythm of his breathing beside her. She had come west searching for purpose, not love. But now, as snow whispered against the cabin walls, she began to wonder if fate had led her here for something far greater. Tomorrow, the world might open again. But tonight, in the warm hush of Gideon Cole's cabin, the teacher and the cowboy shared something far rarer than survival. They shared peace. When morning came, the storm had softened into a gentle fall of snow. The light that streamed through the window was golden, turning the cabin into something almost sacred. Clara sat up, listening to the quiet. The wind had stopped screaming. The world felt washed clean. Gideon was already outside, splitting wood. She watched from the window, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee he'd left warming for her on the stove. Each swing of his axe was sure and strong. Snow glistened on his hair, but he didn't seem to feel the cold. He was a man carved from this land, wild, rough, and steady as the mountains. Clara looked around the cabin that had saved her life. Every inch of it bore his touch, the shelves lined with books, the hand-built table and chairs. Even the small carving of a horse resting on the mantel. For a man who lived alone, Gideon had created beauty out of solitude. She didn't hear him come back in until he spoke. "Storm's over. Roads'll open by tomorrow." "So soon?" she asked, turning toward him. He nodded. "You'll be able to get to Willow Creek. The board will be waiting." Clara's fingers tightened around the mug. The thought of leaving made her chest ache in a way she didn't expect. "You'll take me?" I'll see you there myself." He said it simply, without emotion, but something in his tone told her it wasn't easy for him either. That afternoon, they worked side by side in silence. She helped mend the torn harness while he repaired the wagon runner. The air between them was warm with unspoken things. As the sun dipped low, painting the snow pink and gold, Clara finally spoke. "Gideon, may I ask you something?" He looked up from his work. "Go ahead." "Last night, you said you've built everything with your hands, but nothing with your heart. What did you mean?" He hesitated, then set his tools aside. "I wasn't always this man. I've done things I'm not proud of. I came west to bury them. Been trying to build something good ever since. But it's lonely, Clara. A man can build fences, barns, even a life, and still find it empty if he's got no one to share it with." Clara's heart tightened. "And you think I'm the one to fill that emptiness?" "I think you already have." She looked away, her cheeks warm despite the cold. "I came here to teach, not to start something. Sometimes the heart starts without asking permission." His voice was quiet, but the weight of truth in it filled the room. That night, as they sat by the fire, Clara took one of his books from the shelf, Emerson's Essays, and began reading aloud. Gideon listened in silence, his eyes on the fire, his face unreadable. When she finished, he smiled faintly. "Trust thyself. Every heart vibrates to that iron string," he quoted softly. Clara closed the book. "Do you believe that?" "I didn't," he said. "Not until you knocked on my door." She couldn't speak. The air between them felt alive, like the stillness before lightning strikes. "Gideon," she began, but the words caught in her throat. He stood and took a slow step toward her. "You don't have to say anything. Come morning, I'll take you to town, and you can start your new life. But I'll make one more promise before you go." "What promise?" His voice dropped low. "You warmed my bed to survive. But if you ever come back to this valley, I'll build you that ranch I spoke of. A home. Not because you owe me anything, but because this land feels like it was waiting for you." Clara's heart thudded. She wanted to protest, to say it was nonsense, that she had no intention of staying. But the truth trembled on her lips. She didn't want to leave. The next morning, the sun broke through a sky of brilliant blue. They loaded the wagon, her satchel and few belongings tucked carefully behind the seat. The snow sparkled like diamonds as Gideon helped her climb up. "Ready?" he asked. Clara nodded, though her throat ached. "Ready." The road stretched white and endless before them. For miles, neither spoke. The rhythm of the horses' hooves filled the silence. Finally, Willow Creek appeared, a cluster of rooftops, the schoolhouse just visible beyond the church steeple. "This is it," Gideon said, pulling the horses to a stop. Clara looked toward the small town that was supposed to be her new beginning. Then she looked back at the man beside her. His hands gripped the reins loosely, his jaw set tight. He was ready to drive away, to let her go without a word. She placed a hand on his arm. "Gideon!" He turned, and the look in his eyes nearly undid her. "I thought I came west to teach children," she said softly, "but maybe I came to learn something too, about courage, about second chances." He swallowed hard. "And what have you learned?" "That sometimes home isn't a place, it's a person." For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Gideon reached up, cupping her face in his rough, calloused hand. "You sure about this, schoolteacher? You stay, and the world will talk." "Let it talk," she whispered. "They don't know what we survived." He smiled, slow, quiet, full of something like wonder, and leaned in. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened, full of all the words they hadn't said. When they finally broke apart, the school bell rang in the distance, a clear, sweet sound across the frozen air. Clara looked toward it, and then back to him. "I'll still teach," she said, "but maybe I'll need a place to come home to." "You'll have one," he promised. "We'll build it together." And they did. By spring, Gideon had begun laying the foundation for a new house in the valley below his cabin. Clara taught in the mornings and helped in the afternoons. The town grew around them, families, farms, and children who ran barefoot through the grass. When the house was finished, it wasn't just wood and stone. It was a promise, a life built by two people who'd found each other in the middle of a storm. On their wedding day, Clara wore a simple white dress, and Gideon's voice trembled as he said his vows. "You knocked on my door in a blizzard," he said, "and brought spring into my life." And when she smiled up at him, he added softly, "You warmed my bed that night, Clara, but you've warmed my soul every day since." The guests laughed, the preacher smiled, and the wind carried their laughter across the valley. Years later, when the storms came again, Clara and Gideon would sit by their fire, their children asleep nearby, and remember the night that had changed everything, the night a lost teacher found her future in the arms of a giant cowboy. And every time the wind howled outside, Gideon would hold her close and whisper, "See, I kept my promise. You warmed my bed, and I built you that ranch." And Clara would smile, her voice soft with love and memory. And together, we built a life worth living.